I now see people from India and Kenya and more American cities. Lovely to have you all. Thank you for joining. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think it's time to get this started. So first, let's start by introducing myself. I'm Isabel Parra. I work in the Resilient Cities Network, and this is the second Cities on the Front Line of this year. Really happy to be hosting it, and I'm gonna tell you a bit about the conversation we're gonna have. But first, let's start with the ground rules. So we will be having around 200 people joining today, which are the registered ones, and that's why we have a Q&A question. So you can really, everyone has the chance to put the questions. My colleagues will be capturing all of them, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to ask the questions to the speakers of today, as many as possible. We are going to have the session will be recorded, and then it will be uploaded in our webpage. So please make sure to have a look if you want to see the recording, and also if you want to share it with your colleagues. So let me set the scene, right? Today, the session is about proven solutions that are ready to scale. And I think I opened today the news this morning, and I saw oil price at 126, Iran, Ukraine, and that was just the first page of the news, right? And I'm not going to dwell more into it because I think we've all seen it, we've all read it. It feels like the context is getting harder. But I also want to name this because the majority of people that joined CFL are people working in cities, the ones that are called every time that these global issues become a local problem. And while reading this and thinking in this session, I remember that a couple of years ago, we gathered in Paris, some of our chief resilience officers and the resilience team, to talk to colleagues of Kyiv about the recovery of the city. And for me, something stayed, and it was that the team of Kyiv shared that even while resisting to the Russian bombing, they kept planting flowers in the street planters, because that's one of the things that allowed them to keep the life going for the residents. And for me, that stayed because that's what cities do. Even if there's a crisis or not, cities keep things going. Cities keep navigating even when circumstances are harder. And I think for the last 10 years, we've been witness as a network of all the solutions that our cities have been advancing, that our chief resilience officers and the team are really pushing and sharing with each other and making those solutions travels around this network. So that's why in December of last year, we activated that network, but not only our cities, we activated also our partners and every practitioner that is connected to our cities or cities beyond our network. And we asked them what was working in the cities. And we received more than 100 contributions. We studied more than 150 city cases. And at the end, what that gave us is a solutions map, a shared map of solutions that are being advancing cities. And some of those solutions are quite known. So like the transformations of schoolyards that started in Paris and now are in Milan, Semer, and Quezon. But some other solutions are really changing the way decisions are made in cities, but they're not that known, like the portfolio approach on Cape Town. So I think that solutions map for us, and in the face of this context that seems harder, also answered that even if the context is harder, the practice is becoming stronger. And I'm really happy to have this conversation to show what that means. What does it mean that the practice is becoming stronger? And for me, translate that we have built the knowledge and the solutions that need to be scaling in this decade that we start. So I'm here with Jose Ahumada from Arup, who leads works on city resilience frameworks and will bring a broader lens on how the context for cities has been shifting and is shifting. And also, I'm joined by Federico Merino, the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer of Buenos Aires and a Senior Policy Advisor. And he will show us what this advancing the practice and proving solution means for the city, and what are those trade-offs and the tools that the city is using to scale resilience. So, Jose, let's start with you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Isabel. And I hope you can see my screen now. Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever, depending when you are connecting. It's very nice to see people from everywhere, and that really reflects the practice and the goal of keeping this network of practitioners together. So it's a pleasure to participate in this webinar. Today, I will share some reflections on what we are observing as emerging trends in the urban resilience practice. To begin, I think it's important to take a step back and briefly reflect on what we mean by city resilience. As you all know, resilience is essentially the ability to adapt, recover, and bounce back from difficulties. I particularly like the image of the tree because it reminds us that resilience is not about remaining unchanged, but to shape us in different ways to still grow, adapt, and thrive. And that idea of adapting rather than simply resisting is fundamental to how we think about cities today. Now, when we bring this concept into the context of cities, things become significantly more complex. Cities are made up of a diverse set of interconnected systems like housing, infrastructure, economy, communities, governance, etc., that support the lives of more than half of the world's population. At the same time, they are constantly exposed to a wide range of shocks and stresses. This image in particular is from the 2009 typhoon Kiko in the Philippines. And I saw people connecting from the Philippines, so you might be very familiar with this. And I like this picture as well because it illustrates the complexity very clearly. It shows the interaction between formality, informality, the physical and social structures, infrastructure, trade, and of course, the natural environment. All of these systems are interconnected, and when one is affected, the impacts cascade. So over a decade ago, this led to a fundamental question. How do we plan and manage cities in the face of such uncertainty and complexity? So in response to this question, we developed a definition of city resilience supported by a framework that brought a structure to what was at the time a relatively broad and evolving concept. This framework became the foundation for cities worldwide to develop resilience strategies under the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative, which has since evolved into the Resilient Cities Network. The complexities we identified then are still very present today, but they have become even more uncertain, more interconnected, and often more difficult to anticipate. That is why about 2 years ago, we revisited the framing of city resilience. The goal was to ensure that the framework continues to respond to these evolving complexities. And to inform that update, we undertook a structured research process, which included 40 interviews with resilience experts, engagement with more than 10 CROs, chief resilience officers, and a comprehensive desk review of global trends on the field. And what emerged was a clear message about what issues cities are prioritizing today. At the same time, recent global events like COVID-19, extreme climate events, social and geopolitical conflicts have reinforced the idea that cities are deeply interdependent systems across institutions, communities, infrastructure systems, and the natural environment. So based on that research and consultation, what did we change from the original framework? Interestingly, our conclusion was not to create an entirely new framework, but to evolve it to better align with what cities need to do today. These are three key shifts. First, focus on priority issues for cities. So we brought forward topics such as climate change, social equity, and education that were not clearly reflected on the original framework. These are not just sectoral concerns, but they are core drivers for urban resilience. Secondly, we try now to speak the language of cities. We simplify and adapt how resilience is communicated. We try to use less abstract and academic terminology and to use terminology that is aligned with how cities are organized, planned, and budget. The new goals, for example, that you can see on the screen are pretty much aligned with areas or departments that city work and focus on. And the third shift was a strong emphasis on implementation. So cities are no longer asking about what city resilience is. They are asking, how do we finance actions? How do we deliver them? So the CRF24 is much more focused on enabling decisions and accelerating investments. So building on that, I want to briefly highlight three trends we are observing in practice. They are different in nature, but they all point in the same direction: to accelerate implementation. The first trend is localization. So cities need to connect high-level strategies with place-specific solutions. There's a recognition that resilience challenges and solutions are not uniformly reflected within the city. Investments should have a connection to specific neighborhoods to address community-level vulnerabilities and capacities. To support this, cities require better decision-making tools that translate analysis into actionable insights. One example is UHIT, a tool that Arup developed that allows rapid, large-scale modeling of urban heat conditions. It provides a detailed insight into air temperatures across the city, helping identify the hottest and coolest area under specific conditions and at different times. This creates evidence to make informed decisions to, for example, identify priority locations where interventions can have greatest impact, such as cooling strategy in critical hotspots. The second trend is foresight thinking. Many of the projects planned by cities have an extremely long shelf life. For example, a new transport project might take 10 or 20 or more years from the idea to first operation. Then cities have a long-term operational timeline. So sometimes you are designing something today that will need meeting different needs when finished. That means cities need to understand the future operating context of these new assets now. Some of typical areas to understand include shifts in demographics and lifestyles, new climatic and environmental conditions, or shifts in policy and regulation. Our foresight team have developed an approach to identify trends and signals that might impact the future operation of projects that are emerging today. This graphic is a summary of a horizon scanning exercise done for the city of Lagos as part of a piece of work that we're undertaking actually in partnership with Resilient Cities Network for the Lloyd's Register Foundation. And finally, the third trend is the move toward a portfolio approach to investment. So while there is a substantial capital available globally for infrastructure investment, cities generally face challenges in accessing this, particularly in lower and middle income countries. Cities need to create credible conditions for accessing finance of key projects. This begins with a strong municipal revenue basis, sound financial management, and build local capacity to plan, prepare, and execute investable projects. The portfolio approach leverages interdependencies between projects to create integrated, investable set of projects. And at the end, this approach helps boosting city capacity by embedding standardized managerial tools, governance, and processes. A publication on this topic will be released shortly in case you are interested in exploring it further. And with that, I close here. I'll be happy to take questions later on, and handing over back to you, Isabel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's a couple of questions, but we'll first pass to Federico. But I think for me at the moment is the practice is evolving on also the cities are evolving and the tools must evolve with them. Federico, over to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Isabel. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and thank you to the Resilient City Network for the invitation. It's really great to be here and have this conversation. Jose, it was really interesting, all the framing, so I want to build on that. I want to speak from a very specific place, from inside a city government, trying to make resilient work in practice, not just on paper. And I think that's why this conversation matters, because many of us here are not just designing strategies, we are trying to make them work in the real institution settings. And I'm really glad we have this space to talk about that. So let me start with the question. When you think about what stops cities from scaling resilience, what comes to mind first? Usually we hear lack of funding, lack of capacity, lack of political will. And yes, all of that is real, but in my experience, the deeper barriers are more structural. They're about how cities coordinate across sectors, how long-term investment survives short political cycles, how you access finance when you don't control the system, and how you justify resilience when nothing happens. And I imagine many of you have faced some version of this. So that's why I want to explore today using Buenos Aires and trying to be honest about what works and what is generally difficult in this sense. So very briefly, just for context, Buenos Aires is the capital of Argentina. It has around 3 million residents, but every day another 3 million people come into the city. So in practice, we manage 6 million people daily. And that has real implications because you are not just planning for residents, you are planning for constantly moving population. We are also an autonomous city. That means we run health, education, security, justice, things that in many countries are handled at the national level. So the governance law is significant. And recently we joined the Global Steering Committee of Our Cities and became a UNDRR Resilient Hub. And I will come back to this later because these are not just institutional titles. They actually play a role in how resilience works internally. So before talking about solutions, it's very important to be clear about the problem because the scale of the challenge shapes everything else. And actually, if we take a broader view of resilience that actually we have in Buenos Aires, including economic development, social dynamics, and innovation, the challenge becomes even more complex. But to make it concrete, let me focus on two of our main climate risks. Buenos Aires faces two major climate threats, and both are intensifying. First, flood risk. The city sits on the top of 11 river basins. Most of them are underground. Rainfall has been increasing for decades. The terrain is flat, drainage is structurally limited. So for many years, flooding was not an exception. It was something that happened repeatedly. And the city invested heavily in hydraulic infrastructure, and that reduced the impact significantly. But the underlying risk is still here. And second, heat waves. And this is where the trend is really strong. Heat waves have doubled since 1990s. They are longer, more intense, and more frequent. And they hit hardest in vulnerable neighborhoods, especially where there is less green space and highest pressure to heat. The economic impact is already measurable. Some scholars say that the city loses more than $150 million every year just from health-related productivity loss, and that number is expected to grow. So these are not just future projections. This is something that is already happening to us and to all the cities in the world. That's why everything else I will talk about matters. So given this context, how do you actually build resilience? If you look at the slides, you will see something very simple, but very important. Resilience touches everything: infrastructure, environment, mobility, housing, economic development, civil defense. And I think this is something many cities here will recognize. Each of these areas has its own priorities, different ministries, different budgets, different timelines. They are not designed to work together, so coordination doesn't just happen. It has to be built deliberately. In Buenos Aires, this is where institutional design really matters. Resilience is not placed in a technical department. It sits in the General Secretary office, right at the center of the government, reporting directly to our mayor. And that decision changes a lot. It means resilience is part of a high-level decision-making. It has visibility, and it has something even more important. It has authority, because in practice, sectors don't align automatically, and someone has to make that alignment happen. And here's the reality: no sector will prioritize resilience by default. They prioritize their own mandate. So if resilience sits too low in the structure, it becomes a coordination exercise without real power. So one key takeaway here is where resilience sits in government is not just an administrative detail, it defines what it can actually achieve. Let me give you an example of some of the challenges that you have when you work in resilience. As the slide shows, Buenos Aires is built on varied rivers, and for decades, heavy rain meant flooding, not occasionally, but always. Entire neighborhoods were affected, so the city invested in large hydraulic program. Tunnels, drainage systems, retain basins, all underground. And that investment worked. It changed the flood profile of the city. Neighborhoods that used to flood don't anymore. But there's the key lesson: everything is invisible. There is no visible infrastructure, no clear visual transformation. And the benefit is nothing happening, no flood. So that is extremely hard to communicate politically, because every year you have to defend that investment again against demands that are much more visible and much more immediate. If you look at the slide, that is actually the contract under the city, invisible infrastructure, and about the city, visible interventions. So cooling centers, early warning system, and green infrastructure are things that people see them, that people use them. So they are easier to defend. So what's the lesson here? Resilience is not just a technical challenge, it is a political time problem. You are trying to sustain long-term investment inside a short-term political system, and I think many of you will recognize this tension. So part of our job as practitioner is this: understand which investments are visible, invisible, and work much harder to explain their value. And this connects directly to another challenge. You will see here 3 obstacles. Let me go through them briefly. First, invisible benefits. Preventive investment avoids future losses, but those losses never appear in the budget because they didn't happen. So if you are spending today for something that will not show up tomorrow, and that makes value difficult to demonstrate. Then second, the competing priorities. Cities face constant pressure: housing, public services, security, social demands. So resilience is competing against urgent and visible needs. And without strong evidence, it tends to lose that competition. And third, policy without data. Most cities don't actually know how much they are spending on climate, where the spending is going, and what impact it has. The data doesn't exist by default, it has to be built. And without it, policy is based on assumptions. So in Buenos Aires, we started to build a response. We are developing a climate budget labeling system, but the goal is not just visibility. The first goal is measurement, to understand how much we are investing, how much we are not, and where that investing is happening. Because right now that picture is incomplete. And once you have that baseline, you can go further. You can start linking investment to avoided losses, and in simple terms, how much we spend today and what cost we avoid tomorrow. Flood damages, productivity loss from heat, emergency response cost, and that changes the whole conversation. It shifts resilience from cost to an investment. And once that you can quantify that, it becomes much harder to cut. So this is in a still early stage, but directionally it matters a lot. And when data is not enough, cities look for something else, that is legitimacy, and that connect actually with the international perspective. We usually think of networks as learning spaces, and they are, but they are also political tools. When Buenos Aires became part of the Air City Steering Committee and a UNDR Resilient Hub, that changes in internal conversations. More actors engage, the agenda gains weight, so international recognition becomes local leverage. But let me be clear also, finance is still one of the biggest barriers. Most of the cities cannot access to climate finance directly. We depend on national government, intermediaries, systems that are not designed for cities or local government. That is a structural issue. So what we do from our city, we build pathway. Project pipelines, partnership with development banks, engagement through Urban 20, and we also invest and believe in city-to-city cooperation, because cities that share contrasts offer a different kind of knowledge. So my message is simple: use international engagement strategically for legitimacy, for finance, and for real peer learning. So let me close with 3 key points. First, governance needs a real home, so resilience requires authority, not just coordination. Second, make investment visible. If you can't show it, you will lose the budget conversation. And third, use network and the international approach strategically, not just to learn, but to strengthen your position internally. So the solution exists. What cities need is the ability to stay the course when the political system makes it difficult. Networks and international cooperation help us to do that, and it's good to use them in that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fede. And again, thank you so much, Jose. I really enjoy hearing you both. And I think some of the key words that I'm taking of this conversation would be foresight, to avoid those gaps between strategy and delivery, but also the understanding that those gaps sometimes come from the reality of a political cycle. How do you navigate around those budget cycles, those political cycles, and keep on pushing the agenda, but also how collaboration, and in the case of how you were closing, Fede, how networks and collaboration around peers, but also practitioners, partners, is really how we're gonna make these solutions travel and scale within cities and across cities. So with that, I think you started with a question, Fede, and I wanted to start a poll. So if my colleagues can help me putting the poll in the chat, we would really like to understand that question that Fede said. What are the barriers that your city is facing in scaling resilience? And I'll start the Q&A. I have a question for you, Jose, and it was, can you give any example where foresight has allowed a city to prepare for global uncertainty, like the energy shocks we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation?
I don't have a clear, concrete example now, but I do know that generally the private sector has a more mature way of preventing future risks than cities as an organization. And that comes to commercial scenarios, horizon planning. We are currently working with, I mentioned on my presentation, with the city of Lagos and with the city of Salvador in testing a methodology to actually do our horizon scanning and understand how in 20, 30, and 50 years the projects and the operation will be impacted by emerging trends. So I don't know if I'm answering directly the question, but I think there are examples and approaches that are being built today to really understand with obviously we don't have the evidence of the future, but with some emerging signs of what could happen so cities can prevent and prepare for future shocks.
Thank you so much, Jose. I think you more or less answered the question. So, Fede, I think there's one for you. Like you named that scaling resilience often depends on working across sectors and partners. And what has made those partnerships effective when it comes to practice and helping the city prepare for those shocks?
So I think that that's a really good question. What have made those partners be okay? I think that the most important thing is having, like, for us, an international link. I mean, the first step will be like having the authority that the coordination comes from a very high level position, from the mayor, the chief of staff, or something similar. And then I think that it's a key thing, like doing cooperation and coordination around the government in a very horizontal way. So listening the priorities of each areas and then trying to understand and to translate those priorities in the priorities of another team, and then coordinate everything from a central role in the government. For us, for example, from the General Secretary, we are all the time speaking with the environmental team, with finance team, with the innovation team, with infrastructure and mobility. And all of them, they have their own agenda and their own reality and budget constraints. And what we try to do is translate the priorities of a sector to the other. And then, of course, like talking with high level ministers or also our mayor to try to understand and to do a cost benefit analysis and prioritize like those things to cooperate. But I think that the most important thing is trying to speak in an horizontal way, to be open and to listen at the beginning, not just trying to impose like a concrete action that we want that happen.
Thank you, Fede. Jose, there's another question for you, so I'll read it. Given the localization framing you presented, translating plans to community-specific solutions, what roles do you see subnational resilience priorities playing in shaping or updating national climate commitments like national plans, and what conditions make that feedback loop actually work in practice?
Okay. Thanks for the question. I think localization is not just identifying the right place where to implement a project, but as you clearly notice, Natalia, is about having wider frameworks that establish some principles like the NDCs, and then how you translate that into specific communities. But you should always track and monitor the impact of those of those interventions, so you can report back at national level. And that links to what Federico is saying about connection and break the silos between governmental scales. I know there's a lot of political issues, but at some point, to really report and understand how we are progressing and developing our plans, there needs to be that connection and clarity. So localization, as we are framing it, is really is not just do projects at local level, but really to have this umbrella at city or national level or regional level that sets some principles and goals, and then translate that into different communities as they have different priorities, right? So it's really to understand that clearer. And the second question about the conditions, make that feedback loop to work in practice. If I got it right, I think it's about enablers. So when we talk about what enables implementation of localized interventions, that goes from capacity building to have management systems and approaches that allow for the city to properly monitor those connections between intergovernmental scales, but also to monitor and understand impact in the long term.
Thank you, Jose. So I think almost half of the respondents of the poll see the biggest barrier as the investment and funding, as you foresaw, Fede. And then surely behind is the changes to political cycles. So I think for both of you, of any that wants to answer, is what are those things that are helping the cities you work with overcome those challenges? And why do you think these two are the most challenges, as obvious as that may sound? And yeah, what are those solutions that you're seeing that perhaps other cities can start implementing?
No, I think one of the key elements, and I saw some people connecting from Cape Town, which has a good example of actually the portfolio approach and how they, at city level, they have professionalized the management, financial management and technical management of projects. That I think is one of the things or factors that help overcoming the issues. First, because you create the environment that makes investment attractive, not just for IFIs, but also for private sector. And that's very important shift. It's just when city relies just on grants, that limits and make a dependency that needs some change, right? So that I just wanted to highlight that. So the professionalization and the long-term trust of the public sector, specifically at city level, for different investors. I think that's a key one.
And in my case, I will say a little bit like the same that I said during my presentation. Like I will have like three. Like first is the institutional design, where resilience sits in government really matters. We saw like in different cities that it's placed in a really technical place, and they don't have the authority. Where you need to have it in the center of the government. It becomes much easier to sustain priorities across political cycles. Then second, better data and financial tools. Like cities need to be able to show what they are investing and what they are avoiding in terms of losses. That's like one of the key challenges. And tools like climate budget labeling help to build that evidence. And that makes it easier to defend resilience politically and fiscally. And third, this portfolio approach to finance and partnership, because in reality, cities rarely have a single source of funding. So what we try to do is build a portfolio combining multilateral finance, bilateral cooperations, apart from development agencies and city-to-city partnerships. That requires active international engagement, working with networks, embassies, development banks, identifying opportunities and building projects that can match those channels. So I will say that like I will continue with the same key idea that it's like solutions are not only technical, they are institutional, financial, and political, and cities need to work on all three at the same time. So yeah.
Thank you, Fede. And I think that connects with another question we have in the chat. I'll read it. It's a bit long. How do you balance having one centralized coordination and allowing each sector of the government set their action plan? We're running into a problem of having master planning at the top, but carrying out actions that each sector should undertake, even if it's not in the top of 5 or 10 projects. It's overly master planning, which slows down all the departmental action that needs to move forward. Fede, you want to take that one?
Sorry, can you repeat it? Because I
Let
listened
me
to the
try to
beginning and
rephrase it. How do you balance a need for resilience to be at the center of government when there's competing priorities between sectors and there's a master planning that makes them join their priorities?
so I think that there's like two key things to have a good resilience action and plan. The first one is have like a document or a master plan, like having something written that guide the city. And the second one is having this like central position in the government that can lead all the strategy. I think that if you don't have like this specific office in the center of the government, there are some resources like I don't know, having like a climate change cabinet or resilience cabinet that is like an internal but not an official institution inside the government, but a place where you can have all the different areas of the government and govern them through a technical area, but with the support of a mayor or a chief of staff or something similar to guide the priorities. So that is what I would recommend.
Thank you, Fed.
If I can add,
yeah.
I think the plans, like the master plan, for example, at national or city level or regional level, it shouldn't be like from one sector of the government, because that's probably one of the issues. We don't, and when we hear, and probably I suppose we all agree, we don't want shift on the master plan every political cycle, but have some level of continuation, and some established principles that set the rules at long term. That provides first but those master plans shouldn't be prescriptive. I think flexibility on those plans is the key thing at some extent. So when you have some high level principles, that allows you to adapt and at local level, and also to change according to the needs. That's why I think thinking in future change is important, not just thinking on the 3-4 years of the political cycle.
Agree. Jose, I think you presented the portfolio approach, and we have a question in the portfolio approach. Actually, it says portfolio approach may not work for some cities in the global south, as they have little awareness about this scheme. Is there any partnership platform assisting cities to work on resilience? Thanks.
So it's the question about some solutions and partnerships, right? Well, as I mentioned, there is a publication that will be launched very soon, also in partnership with Resilient Cities Network. But sorry, I'm reading it in the Global South. But I think also, I think those solutions are not are frameworks. I don't think you need to adapt it to the local context. I don't think they are the right solution as they are. For example, as I mentioned, and Albert some of the things. But I do believe for Cape Town takes one shape, and for other cities might take a different shape. But the key principles, like the elements you need to have in place, might be the same. And I do believe it is something that might attract some investment everywhere. Even it might not work because you might need some specific capacity building and continuation of people within the government to provide that continuation. It's very difficult when you have rotation and lack of expertise in some cities to establish those systems that maybe require some relatively expensive I don't know, softwares and managerial skills. But I think if you make the case for the long-term return of those investments, it should work. The thing is make a clear case early on to plan for having those systems in place and create that trust at city level.
Yes, thank you, Jose. I would say Almen New. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If you are assigned to our newsletter, we will make sure that when Arup's paper is out, we will share the information with you. And yes, you can always access those city cases through our knowledge center as well. I think we're now starting to run out of time. So I think I'm going to join one of the questions to both. For you, Jose, from the perspective of tools, what are those tools that you have seen are helping cities start preparing for a future that they cannot see and really start walking the talk of that foresight scenario planning? And Fede, to you, what are those closing remarks that you would like to highlight after the conversation? Thank you.
Well, tools. Well, there are some tools that are relatively well known, like scenario planning. Horizon scanning is another one, and we have used them in different contexts, not just for cities but for organizations, like to plan for like long term and understand the context in the future. And they generally work. At city level, what we are using now in the cities of Lagos and Salvador, we have done some initial research on trends that might affect how the city is prepared for different shocks and stresses in the future. So creating different scenarios and overlapping those scenarios. So for example, if you do a scenario where you assume economy will collapse, for example, in 20, 30 years, and you will need to reinvent or bring economic sources that you don't have today in the face of AI or social networks, etc. Those tools work relatively well at city level when it's especially because it's difficult to invest today on solutions that you don't see for the future. But when you make the case and those signs or trends start becoming more evident, it's easier to make the case for investment on training, on infrastructure, on different things that the city needs to build up those capacities to face those future trends.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jose. Fede, I'll merge two questions for you, and perhaps it would allow you to close. How do you reconcile sustainability with resilience, as they are sometimes in conflict, but also related to the previous conversation? It was, how does Buenos Aires create a balanced approach to investing in resilience?
Oh, I think that like the two are closely connected, but not exactly the same, like sustainability and resilience. I usually think of it in this way, that sustainability is about where we want to go, and resilience is about how we deal with what happens along the way. Sustainability focuses on long-term outcomes, reducing emissions, protecting ecosystems, building a more balanced model of development. And resilience, on the other hand, is about the ability to absorb shocks, adapt to change, and continue functioning under stress. And in practice, the city needs both, because you can be sustainable on paper, but if your system fail when shock happens, those gains don't hold. So the way we try to connect them in our city is that we design sustainability policies that are resilient, and resilient strategies that contribute to long-term sustainability. For example, with green infrastructure that helps to reduce emissions, but also reduces heat and flood risk. So it works in both directions. And I think that the integration is key, especially in a context where cities are facing both long-term transitions and immediate shocks at the same time. And actually, we are now doing the fourth update of our climate action plan. And we decided not to have like a different resilient plan, but to integrate all the resilience concept and strategies into our climate action plan. So it will be like sustainability is the goal, and resilience is like the capacity to get there and stay there. And then the second question was about coordination.
Yes, how do you manage to balance investment of resilience in Buenos Aires?
So actually, I know that we are quite privileged, that we are a really big city, and we work directly with a lot of MDBs and development agencies. So we try to have like the different, we have our own priorities that are set year per year, but then we have a portfolio with all the different needs from the different areas, and we try to match each one with one of those resources, like infrastructure with an MDB or with an development agencies. And then we also use a lot to organize ourselves all the resources that networks like resilient cities, or also we participate a lot in C40, give us to organize that. So that's how we try to work, like matching needs, like doing the prioritization first, and then matching all the needs from each area with a different type of investment.
Thank you so much to both. This has been a really rich conversation. I think, to summarize, I would say I would steal some of your words, Fede, and some of yours, Jose, that some projects are visible and others are almost completely invisible. But at the end, all of them are necessary, just like tools and the approaches that are helping our cities evolved what they created a decade ago and will allow them to prepare further. So I take and confirm what I always think, that resilience is still needed as a framework, because it allows our cities and all practitioners really step back and analyze the city, understand the risks what we see, but also those that we cannot see. And in order for those solutions to keep on traveling, well, connections like the one we're having in this webinar are really important, and the one that our network pushes. Thank you so much. As I said at the beginning, the recording and sessions material will be on the Resilient Cities Network website. We also will be sharing some of the links and materials that we talked about in this conversation, like the practitioner call to scale and the solutions map. And make sure to register and connect for our next conversation in May on waste and informal workers. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day or evening wherever you are. Thanks, Jose and Fede.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.